Lillard's comments on the Bucks and how he feels the Bucks should have been performing like overall this season. So I'm going to pull up the quote real quick right now, and he says, quote, "I thought we was going to be Boston. We was going to be how Boston is right now," end quote. So Damian Lillard, he feels as if the Bucks, they aren't really performing obviously we all know that the Bucks, they've been largely disappointing recently with Doc Rivers coming in as their new head coach, and they've dropped down from 2 all the way down to 4 or 5 in the seedings, as well as in the power rankings. We've reviewed the power rankings several times. They moved from being in the top 7 and top 8 all the way to not being in the top 10 at one point. So obviously there's a lot of things that the Bucks they need to do and they need to fix, but part of that is Dame's fault. I'll get into that a little bit because I don't want to entirely blame it on Dame, but I also want to sort of explain it's normal to for this Bucks team to be going through the type of things that they've been going through. And I feel like while Dame might sort of feel like it's disappointing, it might be a little bit, I think it might be over-exaggerated. Now, the Bucks, again, they're in the 3rd seed. They sort of just found their stride in winning a couple of games. But the gap between the 2nd seed and the 1st seed in the Eastern Conference is much greater than the gap between the 1st seed and the 10th seed in the Western Conference. No, actually, the 8th seed in the Western Conference, excuse me. So, obviously, the Boston Celtics are a very dominant team, being 46-12. Excuse me. So, for Dame to believe that the Bucks would have immediately been like this team, I feel like it's a little bit too much. I understand Giannis, phenomenal player, and Dame, phenomenal player. And if you put them together, it just sounds like the perfect combination. But at the end of the day, it's not just 2 players on one team. There's a whole 15-man roster on basketball teams. And expecting that your team is going to be the best of the best, like how Boston is, just off of those 2 players alone, it's not. I don't really think it's something that should have been expected coming from the Bucks, because the Boston Celtics, they're a team that's been together. The main core of that team with Jaylen Brown, Jason Tatum, Al Horford. I'll just name a couple of more players on that roster that they had Marcus Smart. Unfortunately, now after the trade, they sort of they don't have him anymore. Derek White, all of these players, they've Luke Cornett, all of these players, they have that chemistry from previously playing with each other, especially Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. This wasn't an overnight thing for the Boston Celtics. This was a team that was built from the ground since 2018, I believe, when they made the Western Conference Finals with Jason Tatum as a rookie. This team has gone through it. They've gone through all sorts of hardships to get where they've been at right now. And we can't expect teams to be like Golden State, where they got Kevin Durant and they were immediately the best team and everybody immediately expected them to make the finals. That's a completely different scenario, because that team was incredibly stacked and incredibly powerful on the offensive side of the ball. And the Celtics, they're incredibly powerful on the offensive side and the defensive side, but that was through drafting and through chemistry. And the Bucks recently acquiring Damian Lillard, they still need time before they can be that dominant team. So I think now it wasn't the season to expect that kind of dominance from the Bucks. However, I am not going to say that they haven't been disappointing this season. In the beginning of the season, when they had Adrian Griffin, it looked like the Bucks were it looked like the Bucks and the Celtics were the team to beat. The game difference wasn't as big as it was now between the 1 seed and the 2nd seed, because the Bucks and the Celtics, they were relatively close in terms of their record. But when you add in a new coach mid-season, obviously there's going to be a lot of adjustments that need to be made mid-season. Not to mention the adjustments that Dame already had to make, being the second option on the Bucks under Adrian Griffin. Now he has to go through like a whole new coaching scheme mid-season. So essentially for Dame, that's 3 different head coaches in the span of less than a year. So that's not something easy for a team to overcome and for a player to overcome. And we talk about disappointments coming in from the Bucks. Dame has low-key been a very strong point in those disappointments. Like, he's been a very prominent point in those disappointments. And like, I'll talk about it more in a different segment you'll see later on, but Damian Lillard's his efficiency and his true shooting percentage and his numbers, they've all dropped considerably. Now, obviously, like, the raw numbers and the raw stats, they're expected to drop when you go from being the number 1 option in Portland to being the number 2 option in a competing team. But it's the efficiency that I'm looking at, and the efficiency has dropped tremendously for someone like Dame. Dame has the reputation of being an elite 3-point shooter, and he's shooting 34% from 3. Someone who has that reputation as an elite 3-point shooter and was getting talked about being as good of a shooter as Stephen Curry doesn't shoot this bad from the 3. It's very bad for him. Now, for any other player that doesn't have that reputation, it's seen as decent, or it's seen as like pretty good. But for someone like Dame, he should be shooting in the high, like 38, 39% from 3 at the very least. But he's not doing that, especially like given how like the load has changed. His efficiency should have like at least like taken a leap. Similar to how Kevin Durant, when he was on Golden State, playing with Curry and Clay, his efficiency took a leap because there was not much pressure on him on the offensive side. Granted, there was a lot more pressure on him to win these games, however, and I feel like that pressure is sort of getting to Dame, and it's like he sort of doesn't necessarily know how to, I wouldn't say know how to deal with it, but it's new for him, I guess, because now he's expected to win, and he's expected to have these types of performances day in and day out. When you're not really expected much from the media, it's a lot easier because there's a lot less stress. But when you're expected a lot, there's like a lot more that goes on in your mind. However, being someone like Dame, having a clutch reputation and being ice cold, these type of things shouldn't really affect him. So I feel like most of this disappointment is more so like on him rather than like the team as a whole, because I feel like if Dame were to play like and was at least like just a little bit more efficient from the field, they would have won a lot more games here, in the race between, and the game difference between the first seed and the second seed would be a lot closer between the two of them. Obviously, like, it's still early in the mid-season, so Dame has time to sort of like, and the Bucks have time to sort of adjust to it. But again, like, this sort of stuff, like, I felt like it should have happened instantly with Dame because of like his reputation and as a player and as a shooter. But going into a new environment, going into a new offensive scheme, obviously, like, there might be some hiccups. And there's a little bit of debate, honestly, on who the leader of this team really is. Giannis keeps saying it's Damian Lillard, but the media refuses to give it to Dame, and they can insist that Giannis is the key player on this team. And I think it's sort of like both. Like, I'm very much for like the team basketball and whatnot. I don't think this Bucks team has like that guy. Like, they do have that guy, and they do have two guys, right? But they don't have one definitive guy, and that's okay. Like, that's part of the team. And like, how do I put this in the way? So Damian Lillard, like, he's the man down the stretch. Like, he's the guy that you're going to give the ball to late in the game. But Giannis can still be the best player on your team without needing to like take those kinds of shots. Granted, he can, but he doesn't necessarily have to be the first option to take those shots. And I think it sort of benefits the Bucks in a way, because Dame's reputation being a clutch player it draws much more attention to him late in the game. And that allows more space for Giannis to not only create looks for himself, but to create looks for other teammates, thus giving them much more of a chance to win games late in the fourth quarter. It's much better when you have two guys that can hit that shot or that can win the game for you, as opposed to just having one guy that could win the game for you. And I feel like that dynamic, it's like a Kobe and Shaq dynamic. Like, Kobe and Shaq, obviously, like, we say that Shaq is the best player, like, on that Laker team, but some people might argue that Kobe was the most clutch and the closer of that team. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. People still had the respect for Kobe, and there was still, like, debate on, like, whether or not Kobe was, like, the man of that team. But, like, I don't see a problem with them sharing that name, honestly. Like, it's a dynamic duo for a reason, and they brought them together for a reason. So a lot of people tend to be harsh on Giannis because it's like, oh, he's not the one that's taking the final shot. And a lot of people like to be harsh on Dame because he's not even the best player on his team. Yes, that's the dynamic that both of them have, and that's what makes them so great. That's what could make them so great if they can work on their chemistry and they can elevate themselves to that type of play. But that's just my personal opinion. So with that, we're out of time with our second segment. So we're going to go into the third segment where I talk about, where I give a quick recap of all of the NBA games that went down yesterday. So stay tuned for that after this short break. I will be right back.